Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich. My name is Rich Brown. I'm the co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show, America's #1 self-defense podcast. And that is today's sponsor of the show here, Coffee with Rich, is sponsored by the American Warrior Society and American Warrior Show. Please find out more if becoming a member of the American Warrior Society is right for you, no matter where you live in the world. And that goes for today's guest, Mr. Johnathan Deal. And in just a moment, I will read his bio while we're waiting for folks to jump on. I want to tell you about today's sponsors. We have Century Martial Arts makers of the Bob XL. If you need a good striking dummy, let me highly recommend the Bob XL to you. We also have Appalachian Standard, maker of the finest CBD products money can possibly buy. You've heard me talk about them every single morning. Check them out at apphemp.com. But better yet, click on the links in today's show notes. The American Warrior Show link will actually take you to our website where you can find out all the discount codes to all of today's sponsors. Cool Fire Trainer, I've talked about it many times. Yes, there is a way that you can still maintain your firearms proficiency, even though ammo here in the United States is incredibly hard to come by. You can get a Cool Fire Trainer, a little bit of CO2, and it will take your dry fire routine to the next level. Mountain Man Medical. You're far more likely statistically to use your trauma kit than you are your firearm. So make sure you got trauma kits where you live, where you work, and in your vehicles. You will thank me for it when and if the time arises. And I'm going to tell you, we have a co-branded trauma kit coming out from Mountain Man Medical. You can get it on pre-order right now as we're getting everything in stock. Check out the links below to find out more about that. Finally, makers of the Precision Holsters are today's sponsors. The tactical belt I'm wearing right now, the Ultra Appendix holster that I've got on, is the finest holster I believe that money can buy. Their competition line is incredible. If you don't carry concealed, but you do shoot competitively, let me recommend their competitive line to you. And as we got folks jumping on, please like and hit that share button. Definitely excited to have Mr. Johnathan Deal all the way from South Africa this morning to join us. You're not going to want to miss today's show. And I know that I'm a little early, so I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to start jumping on before I go any further. But if you are on this morning, let me know where you're from. And if you're a coin member of the American Warrior Society, what your coin number is. And I'd like to welcome you to the show. And I'll go ahead and start by reading Johnathans Bio while we're waiting for folks to jump on. Mr. Deal, Johnathan Deal, operates full-time as a founder and lead instructor of 0 Points Down Academy in South Africa. 0 Points Down Academy is a training operation catering to police-mandated training of citizens on all small arms as well as advanced levels of sports shooting, including precision long-range shooting. He is the IDPA state coordinator for the Cape Province in South Africa and a keen sports shooter. In 2020, he founded the Safe Citizen Campaign, a civil rights group concerned with the safety of South Africans who daily face escalating and brutal crime. Writing on travel and tourism, his book, Timeless Karoo, was published in 2007, and as a freelance journalist and photographer, he also writes for various publications, including Rhodes Business School, website, and the Daily Maverick. He is a past chairman of the Southern African Freelancers Association and is sought after as a speaker and debater on environmental issues at international conferences. Mr. Deal presented at Al Gore's International Climate Leadership School in Johannesburg in March of 2014 and was honored in the same year to be listed as City Press, one of 100 world-class South Africans, sharing the accolades with fellow citizens such as Nelson Mandela and Charlize Theron. As a committed trainer, he holds a fierce passion for lawful and competent private gun ownership and regards himself as an influencer in this realm in South Africa. Mr. Deal intends to use every resource available to unite lawful South Africans who support private firearms ownership to overturn the untrue perceptions that firearms are bad and that private firearm owners are to blame for the flood of illegal firearms in his country. Johnathan, good morning, sir, and welcome to Coffee with Rich.
Thank you, Rich. Great to be with you guys. And just for the record, my coin number is 1436.
1436. That's amazing. That's quite a while ago. Jonathan Shriver is on from Yukon, Oklahoma. Good morning, Jonathan. Terry is on. Says good morning from Arab, Alabama. 71 degrees and overcast. My good friend Jimmy is on. He says good morning from Rhode Island. Coin number 1966. Please like and hit that share button. So you're an American Warrior Society coin member living in South Africa. How did you end up joining the American Warrior Society?
I had the good fortune to come across Mike Seeklander's teachings on the net, and Mike is a part of my daily life in dry fire and studies, and I adapt and develop a lot of my training programs from his advice and his teachings.
He is a phenomenal instructor, no question about that. From the bio that I just read, Jonathan, did I miss anything before we get going?
No, I actually was listening to it and I thought maybe it's a bit much, but no, you didn't miss anything. Okay. Other than that, I'm motivated by an unfair fight, which is generally why I pick up the cudgels against the big corporations or the governments if they're not behaving.
Yeah, and we'll talk a lot about that in today's show. You know, I've said it many times before. I think there's so many lessons in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in South Africa, for us here in America, and we are doomed if we don't watch what's going on in your country. Rudy is on this morning. My brother Jeff Brown is on this morning. Tony is on. Paul is on from Niagara Falls, New York. Good morning, guys. Like and share. We got Johnathan Deal all the way from South Africa. Jonathan is a renowned firearms and trainer, author, speaker, lecturer, etc. And we're very fortunate to have him on. Tell us about what you're doing over there at 0 Points Down Academy.
Rich, 0 Points Down is a small outfit. Probably the best way to describe it would be a bespoke training academy. Essentially, as a rule of thumb, if there's a standard time period for competency training or proficiency training that is stipulated by the government or an official agency, I take that and double it, maybe 2.5 times in terms of the length of the training, and I bump the price up. There are two things that happen. One is that I'm not prepared to certify people proficient if I'm not happy that they're proficient, and I don't think that the standard proficiency is good enough. And secondly, I want to attract people that are very serious about learning to shoot and handle a firearm properly. So my prices are high, and I get serious clients. So that's what we do. I enjoy it very much. My passion is probably training sport shooting. The other stuff really goes according to a curriculum, and it can get quite repetitive. But the sport shooting training is great. And of course, like all instructors everywhere, I've learned that at both ends of the continuum of training, there's a challenge, because if you have a brand new shooter who develops an absolutely horrific flinch, you've got to have the patience and the skill to take them through getting rid of that before you spoil their shooting career for them. And on the other end of the continuum, when you're working with a very experienced sports shooter, we all know that as instructors, we know that it's very difficult. If something's not quite right in their shooting, it's actually difficult to spot what's going wrong. So those are the two ends of the continuum for me, and there's a lot of challenge in both of them.
Yeah, I completely. I'm smiling because I'm relating. It's the guy that comes to the class that knows a lot that's always going to be the challenge. You know, we had Mike and I were teaching a class somewhere out west. I think it was last year. Yeah, last fall. And he literally showed up without a belt, without a holster, and he didn't know how to operate his firearm. And so it literally was, by the end of the 2 days, he was a really competent, capable shooter, because he didn't know anything. He was completely wide open to learn.
Yeah.
We got Dan on this morning. Good morning, Dan. My good friend Nick Wallace is on from Charlotte, coin number 2127. Please like and hit that share button. As you can tell by Jonathan's accent, he is, if you're just now joining us, he is a firearms trainer, lecturer, etc. in South Africa. I want to ask you, so what is your current firearms training focused on at 0 Points Down? I mean, do you do the self-defense, and the competitive? What do you see more of?
I'm actually seeing more of what a program that I developed called Core Handgun Defense. And it's a 2-day program that teaches students 8 or 9 techniques to create time and space in an unexpected attack. So if they're accosted at their car, at the ATM, coming out of the supermarket, at the gate to their home, going in and out of a building, how to create time and space to either run away, which is first prize, or to get their firearm into the fight, which is second prize. And that's turning out to be a very popular course. I actually have one starting tomorrow morning with 16 students for the 2 days. And yeah, by the time that's over, I'm bushed. It's a hard work, but a very popular course. And it sort of encompasses security in and around the vehicle, certain techniques that they can look at applying inside a vehicle with their firearm, bringing the rest of the family into the training so that they understand things not to do in order to complicate the situation inside the motor vehicle when there's something going down. And we briefly touch on something that I don't advocate at all for civilians, which is called house clearing. There's a lot of gung-ho chat on the internet about people doing house clearing and this and that, and guys sitting and saying, oh, I would have done that and I would have done that. Actually, my advice to them with house clearing is don't do it. If you don't have a reason to go into a place to try and get somebody out of there, stay out of it. And the only reason that we teach some of the very basic techniques is if somebody's responding to an intrusion in their home and they need to get to a room where their children are, how to do that safely. But I'm very careful to try and de-gung-ho the attitude of civilians to firearms, because it's very, very easy for them to fall in the trap of trying to emulate what they see on television. And the only people that do that well are trained military and police or law enforcement teams that train together day after day with a really big fat operational budget and who work together as a trusted team.
Now, there's a couple of things I want to touch on that you brought up in that answer, Jonathan. One of which is you casually said, and I want to circle back to it, when they leave the gates of their homes. And, the gated communities in South Africa, if the average American are not familiar with how a lot of South Africans live behind gates and walls, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that it's become a standard thing. It's quite interesting because when I grew up as a youngster, we didn't really have anything like that, and I lived in a rural area. I'm not a youngster anymore. I was born in '59. I'll be 63 next year. But steadily, there's been a growth of walls and fences around residential properties, certainly in urban areas. And most of them nowadays, where people can afford it, they're very high walls. It's electrified fencing, security systems, armed response, cameras all over the place. And people generally live with a fairly significant sense of trepidation at armed home invasions. And I don't want to sort of overplay this card either. People are not walking around in fear, but certainly they are generally very aware of it. When I live on a 10,000 acre farm, ranch, you call it in the US, in the Karoo of South Africa, which is a sort of semi-arid area, maybe like Montana and or Colorado, that sort of environment. Even Arizona probably is quite similar. So I live on a property of that size. We are about 6 or 7 miles from our nearest neighbors. So it's wonderful from a point of view of not being disturbed. And we don't expect any casual intrusions. So if there's an intrusion here, they're going to be coming here with a planned attack because of particularly the firearms that I have available here, which are in what we call a Category 3 strong room in South Africa. It's a very, very solid room. But I have a number of firearms around me and where I'm sleeping throughout the night. And I'm prepared for most eventualities. We have a security plan, which is known to all of the residents of the property here. And we've covered basically our reaction to various types of scenarios. So that's how I do it here. And people in the suburbs also sometimes take it quite seriously. But the average person in the street, as far as situational awareness goes, heading for a hiding. I often am fond of calling a cell phone a peripheral vision disabling device, because people are walking in the street or in the parking lot of the mall on their cell phone on WhatsApp, completely unaware of what is happening behind them or even in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had Neil Taylor on the show a couple of different times, and Neil is a corporate attorney in South Africa. And he was telling me that part of the, it wasn't called that, but kind of a defund the police, reimagine the police that happened after the end of apartheid. I think it was ushered in by the ANC. Really disenfranchised most of the poor South Africans, because he said, Rich, me and my neighbors, we live behind walls. We've got former South African Defense Force guys riding around in Bearcats, heavily armed, that protect us behind the walls of our subdivision. But this really disenfranchised the average South African. Would that be a true statement, or is he overreaching there?
I think it's had a marked effect on the safety and security in South Africa. We're sitting with a situation now where the police are completely and utterly unable to manage the crime issues in the country. There's been such a political interference in the duties of the police that even at the local police stations, things like shotguns, even with rubber bullets, have been taken away from them, and they're issued only to the so-called riot squads, who are scattered around the country in very few locations. So the average police station, the equipment that they have at hand is absolutely shocking. The nearest police station to me is about 18 miles away. They are, for a small police station, they have been up to 22 people undermanned at time. And I know of instances in the evenings where there has been one female police officer on duty in that entire police station. Not a single person out on patrol, no ability to respond to any type of incident in the nearby town at all. So we're sitting in a situation where in South Africa there are an average of between 58 and 60 murders a day. It's been like that since the mid about 2015, 2016. And our Minister of Police, Becky Cele, is on record in our parliament telling our parliament that we are living in a war zone, but we're not at war. And he was referring to the murder rate in South Africa. And that has stayed fairly constant. It dipped a little bit during COVID when a lot of people were locked down, and the police had their own brutality issues to deal with then, which cost them a lot of damage to their relationship with the South African community. But it's right back up there now again, and shows no sign of letting off. And of course, as the effects of COVID trickle through the economy and more people are unemployed, hungry, desperate, people that necessarily wouldn't choose a life of crime are being forced into a life of crime.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, what's driving the crime? Is it poverty? Do we know?
There's a culture of lawlessness in the community in South Africa. The African National Congress, as the leading party and certainly running the administration and the government, have become so corrupt, and their leaders are exposed on a daily basis to the tune of billions of rands of corruption scandals in everything, even as recently as the money that was given to South Africa by the international community and loaned by the IMF last year. Hundreds of millions of rands of that was siphoned off in illegal contracts for friends, so-called supplying masks or surgical equipment or whatever at 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 times the price. And that type of creative purchasing was done. So there's this culture of crime that exists in the ANC. And I think to a large extent it has established a disrespect for the rule of law in the country. More recently, we have, just through the stroke of a pen and the passing of a month, around about 350,000 previously lawful firearm owners with a specific class of firearm license here have found themselves technically in possession of unlicensed firearms and literally fitting the definition of criminal under our Firearms Control Act, which carries with it a 15-year jail sentence if the court so decides. And since the 1st of February, they're there. They had 350,000 people that woke up on the 1st of February who were now de facto criminals under this new legislation, or legislation with a twist. My point about that, to answer your question about what's driving the crime in South Africa, is when you have 350,000 people who were never criminals before, after they've woken up a week or 10 days thinking, I'm a criminal, okay, I'm a criminal, I'm a criminal, they start becoming used to the idea of criminal disobedience. And it becomes something like just driving a car without a license, like a youngster, or having one beer too many, or taking a chance. So we're finding that there is a general and abiding disrespect for the law in South Africa. And the law is mercilessly applied to everybody except the political elite and their connections. So you're either a very, very wealthy businessman who can afford the best legal representation, or if you're a normal run-of-the-mill person, you're not one of the political elite, the law will be applied mercilessly to you.
Yeah, and that's I want to touch on a couple of things here that are in the comments. And if you're just joining me this morning and someone shared this with you and you're like, who are these folks? My name is Rich Brown, co-host, co-founder of the American Warrior Society. I'm joined by Johnathan Deal, lecturer, author, speaker, and civil rights, gun rights advocate in South Africa, also owner and operator of 0 Points Down Academy. Tony says expensive, strict, government-mandated training and approval ensures lower-income families are denied their God-given right to the tools for self-defense. I would agree with that. And when I had Neil Taylor on, attorney in South Africa, he showed a package like this thick and said, this is what I have to file to keep my firearms.
Yeah.
And he said, now, I'm a corporate attorney. I do this all day long. I fill out government paperwork. It's nothing for me. But for the average South African that may not have a computer in their home, access to a computer or printer, how are they supposed to do it? So I'd like to talk to you about that in just a moment. Before I do, I also want to bring up a couple more points. Rick says, good morning, brother. Alan says, good morning from occupied Virginia. My brother Jeff has a great question. He says, do you feel safe speaking out about your sitting government?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I've got a fairly long history of opposing the government on various issues, and everything that I do is transparent. I have nothing to hide from them. At this stage, we still live in a democracy, and it doesn't bother me at all. I'm obviously aware and alert to things, but I've learned long ago that everything that moves around on social media or on the internet or any device that can send any type of signal is probably listened to and monitored, and it's a fact of life. I think that if you are behaving in a lawful manner, you need to have the courage of your convictions and stand up and speak out.
Absolutely agree. Let's get down into the weeds a little bit, Johnathan. What are some of the specific political legislative challenges for gun owners in South Africa, or heck, America for that matter?
I think that Here, the very interesting development that happened exactly almost a week ago, and that was at 10 o'clock on last week, Friday. The government published a proposed firearms amendment bill. Amongst some of the amendments that they would like to what is already a very, very strict piece of legislation in terms of acquiring a license for a firearm, and I'll backtrack just a little bit there. Under our current legislation, we have people, sometimes qualified applicants, waiting up to a year or 2 years for a license for a firearm. So they do their training. They have to then apply for a competency certificate, which involves all sorts of background checking and backwards and forwards, and it wastes months in an inefficient system. That can take 7 or 8 months to issue, still no firearm. Then once they receive that, they can go to a gun shop, choose a firearm, and the license application for that specific firearm is then put onto the application, and that goes into the police. Another 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 months easily can pass. So some of my students waited up to 2 years for their first firearm license. Within the context of that, the government seeks to regulate that even further, and they have now, one of the provisions or objects that they would like to push through is that self-defense shall no longer be a reason for owning a firearm. The other very startling piece in that legislation is that possession of any equipment for reloading or making ammunition will be an offense. In other words, they intend to shut down our reloading. So they've worked out that if they can't get us on one side, they'll just shut down the reloading. They won't issue any import permits for primers or powder, and that'll be it. Eventually the population, if they can't get the guns away, would theoretically be sitting with guns without any ammunition. So we are scrambling as a country and as a community at the moment. I think that the ANC have overplayed their hand dramatically with this act. They have woken a sleeping giant. We are getting support from every spectrum of the community. Money from people that have got money, support from people that have got support, political parties standing up, government departments in some instances standing up, and in sheer incredulity at the content of this bill. So I think they've done us a favor as the leader of Safe Citizen, because if I'd lived another 50 years and I was given a 50 million rand present, I don't think that I could have generated this type of response or interest from the community. So we're flat out with that. I'm sleeping about 4 hours a night at the moment, and we're running it on a number of prongs. One is a strategic legal intervention where we'll take them into court, and the other is obviously we're pursuing the social media and mainstream media to raise the community awareness. And then we'll also be pursuing political advocacy and doing lobbying, that sort of thing. So that's our campaign.
Excellent. And Elke says, I truly do not understand the global-wide desire by politicians to disarm citizens. And one of the things that you and I were talking about, I think it was yesterday, Jonathan, in the pre-show, was that there's another piece of legislation, or maybe I misunderstood this, that seeks to take all privately owned land and make it held by the government. Did I misunderstand that?
No, you didn't. It's known colloquially here as EWC, expropriation without compensation. And the government is seeking to modify one of the sections of our Constitution or our Bill of Rights to say that if the government deems it necessary under certain circumstances, they will have the power to expropriate your private property, be it the land, your house, your motor car, your firearms, your savings, your pension, any property, movable or immovable, and use it for the good of the state. We believe that it's part of their national democratic revolution, which has some of the precepts of moving what is at this stage a capitalist economy to a socialist economy. Naturally, as we have seen in countries like Zimbabwe, that doesn't work too well in Africa. But nevertheless, they have the power to push it through, and it's a very, very worrying thing. I could be facing an application for expropriation, or getting a letter to say, notice to be say, we're taking your farm. You've got a month to get off. Go. So my feeling is that the politics, and you can see this in America as well, the politics of disarmament are driven by the government. And I think that in South Africa, like any government who has that type of agenda, they would prefer to deal with a population that is not armed and that is absolutely at their mercy.
What's amazing to me is here in America, most people don't know what Mugabe did. They don't know who Robert Mugabe was. They couldn't find Zimbabwe on a map if they tried. But your neighbor to the north, right across the Limpopo River, if my geography remembers correctly, you've got Zimbabwe, and you have all the lessons of what happened when Robert Mugabe took the farms away from the white landowners. And you saw the economic impact. You felt the economic impact when the refugees from Zimbabwe rushed across the border. So it's like, why your country would think, yeah, but this time we're going to do it the right way. See, they did it the wrong way. We know what we're doing. I mean, it dumbfounds me.
Yeah. No, there's just no way that it can succeed. Africa has a very different rhythm. It has a different ideology. It has a different political outlook. It is a very different continent. And we will never be able to get Africa to function like Washington or London or any other big city or any other city in a first world country. But it doesn't mean that it needs to be driven into the ground to get it right. Yeah. I don't know what else to say there.
Yeah. Jaco is on this morning from South Africa. Good morning, Jaco. Got one of your fellow countrymen on this morning. And, my brother and I my brother has spent a lot of time in Africa. I have never been in sub-Saharan Africa, but I've been in North Africa quite a bit. But I think you're right. It is a different rhythm. And I imagine it's even more different as you get into sub-Saharan Africa than it is in, say, Morocco or Tunisia, or et cetera, right?
Well, if you look at the way that the economy of Africa developed on the back of mining, it followed very much the blueprint that you would have seen in the development of America in big cities and regions and that sort of thing, where it was driven by an industrial revolution and the growth of an industrial economy. But I think that one of the things that militates against sustainable development and improvement in Africa is that there's a concept that seems to have taken hold, and this was articulated by Jacob Zuma, the previous president of South Africa, when he was accused of corruption and when the government was taking a hammering in the media and the international media about corruption. He said, it's absolute nonsense. He said, in Africa, there's no such word as corruption. Corruption is a term coined in the West. It belongs to the West, and you can keep it there. In Africa and South Africa, we don't have corruption. And there seems to be a mindset that if you're appointed to a position looking after public money or working for the state as a civil servant, if you have an opportunity to be corrupt in your job, you would be basically stupid to not take advantage of it. It comes with the job. If you have an opportunity to skim some money off or favor your family with contracts, then go ahead, because there's no such thing as corruption. It's sort of your share that's due to you. And that has stripped this country of billions and billions of rands that it could ill afford, at the cost of the poor and disempowered in the country, mostly.
Yeah, and John asks, what is the situation with China's influence in South Africa?
I'm I'm not a I don't study international politics, and I don't understand very much about it, or geopolitics. But personally, I'm very concerned about how close the Chinese have got to the South African government, about some of the enormous projects that have been started in this country, that have been started with either by the Chinese directly or with money borrowed from them. And the Chinese are a very, very shrewd nation. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I actually admire their business acumen and their determination. And when they decide to do something, they do it. But their history of expansion in Africa is using corrupt people to cement their stay in a country. And they will loan a government what to that government is an enormous amount of money, and to them a small amount of money, and say the terms of the loan are that if you default on that loan, you give us that harbor or that airport as security. And when the government defaults on the loan, as a lot of African governments will, de facto, the Chinese end up owning that port facility or that airport or that mine. And they will buy a mineral concession from the local chief for the price of building a road for the village and a football field. So, sorry, I just want to get rid of that. I don't know how it's coming to me. Sorry about that. I thought I'd switch this thing off.
That's okay. Well, what you're saying, Jonathan, kind of echoes what Elke is commenting here in the comments thread. He says the free roads and bridges come with a price so that they can rape natural resources from your country.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to talk about this morning is, there's a new something from your government was published recently, and it's a firearms amendment bill, if I understand this correctly, that literally seeks to disarm you guys, if I understand that correctly. And you guys have been given like 40 something days to fight it, or it's going into effect. Am I right on that?
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the bill was launched last Friday. It's extremely technical because it actually has a whole lot of amendments to it and refers to previous amendment bills. So it's very technical reading. For an attorney with a full practice and a proper understanding of the law, it would be a challenge to actually respond to it in time. For the average gun owner and the man in the street, he's got no opportunity to be able to answer that properly. And they will have to rely on organizations like the one that I head up, SafeCitizen, to be able to guide them through putting that commentary into the government. And we're facing a very wily foe. They have a political agenda. They are trotting it out under the basis of they want to make the community safe by banning firearms, when in actual fact they know that by doing that, they're going to expose tens of millions of lawful South Africans to the criminals who, just like in America, if everybody's disarmed, the last people that will be armed will be criminals. And so you'll have the law-abiding citizen at the mercy of the criminals who don't care about the law in the first place. So this act is a very, very serious thing. Later this afternoon, I have a strategic meeting with a high-level legal team, and we're going to basically go through all of our options in terms of how to attack this. Are we going to attack it in the 45-day comment period? Can we take it directly to the Constitutional Court? Do we have to go through other courts first? All of those decisions have attached to them millions of rands of legal fees, millions. Just the same as in the United States. Attorneys are very expensive and legal counsel is very expensive. We're talking about, for the type of counsel that we're using here, 7,000-8,000 Rand an hour during consultation. Sorry, I'm not. You muted, Rich.
That's something I do every show. I don't know, Jonathan. I'll get it right one of these days. What I was going to say is, if you fail in this 45-day moratorium that you have, what are the consequences for someone like you?
For me, very serious, but not immediately so, because I operate a training institution. So I have a license for a significant number of firearms to be used in training. And one of the groups of people that I train are security officers, sometimes anti-poaching teams, otherwise just security officers that would be doing duty in business premises and that sort of thing, or guarding cash in transit, those type of applications. And so it's going to be difficult for them to just say, we're going to shut down the training industry, because somebody has to train the security officers. Security officers in South Africa outnumber the police about 5 to 1. So we have maybe 500,000 active security officers and another 1 million registered but not working at the moment. But for the man in the street, the situation very dire. He would have to hand in his firearms, and he would literally then face the same sort of dangers that you would face anywhere in the world, I suppose, from attackers that could harm you, and the home invasions here and the planned robberies don't generally involve one person. They come in 3s and 4s and 5s. So what are you going to do? Maybe Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee can take out 5 people with their bare hands. Not Joe Average.
No, and no, I would imagine not. And I want to we're going to talk about the farm attacks here in a little bit, but I think I've called South Africa the canary in the coal mine for us here, gun owners here in America, because we can see the slippery slope that they've been pushing you guys down for years. And I want to be very specific here with the folks that are watching us live, Jonathan, that will watch in the days and weeks to come, that will watch us on Coffee with Rich channel on YouTube, or maybe on a podcast. Let's be specific. What are the lessons that you see? Because you've been to America several times. What are the lessons for gun owners and self-defense advocates here in America from you guys in South Africa?
I think one of the things that I would advise the Americans to do, as much as it might stick in their craw, is to be prepared to consider background checks and some emphasis on training, simply because people that are uneducated with firearms, that can literally go into a gun shop and purchase a handgun and go to a local shooting range or back to their home where their family are without having done any type of training or lessons, are a great risk to their family and to the community, not because of bad intentions, simply because they are untrained and unqualified to be in possession of a handgun. And we all know about some of the accidents that happen, the unfortunate accidents that happen in the hands of untrained people. So I think that, and by making that type of concession, you come across as being reasonable and responsible. I also understand the Second Amendment and the fact that it is a constitutionally given right to you in the United States. And at this point in time, you don't have to ask anybody for permission to get a firearm unless you're in some of the states that are already regulating and locking down certain things in magazine capacities and so on. And I understand that it would rankle with some people and say, that's my right, I don't have to discuss it with you. We've had firearms in our family since 4 or 5 generations, and we're not going to be regulated now. But certainly as populations grow, as our culture and our community values shift, I think that some form of training is a good idea, voluntary, and possibly that registration or even a background check is maybe not a bad idea. It may just highlight somebody who has been in trouble with the law before, who has had some history of violence. That indicates maybe it's not a good idea for that person to have a firearm. As far as actually owning it and using it, an absolutely responsible attitude and conduct in terms of being with it in public, of knowing what you're competent to do and what you're incompetent to do. And then turning to the other side of the coin is guarding, uniting people, uniting them at community level, at city level, at a regional level, at a state level, and at a national level, to not allow the political left to encroach on gun ownership with a political agenda. That's very important. If you give them concessions, like allowing them to bring in ballistic testing as compulsory or to limit magazine capacities, I think that you're on a hiding to nothing. I was very intrigued about 2.5 or 3 years ago to see the backlash, and I believe it was in New Jersey, against magazine capacities in handguns. And to see that even some of the local police were refusing to arrest or prosecute people for having magazines of a certain capacity in their handguns. And I think that fell down. And I believe that Maryland also were one of the states that led the charge on ballistic testing and ballistic fingerprinting of guns, and cost them tens of millions of dollars, and it was a complete failed experiment. So, yeah, my advice is to not let them get away with it. But, Rich, it has to happen with gun owners and responsible gun owners standing together. I've been quite keen, and I've been encouraged by 1 or 2 of my friends in the United States to actually bring SafeCitizen to America and market it as a concept there, simply because the name works, and it's something that anybody can don without taking an extreme position. Everybody has got the right to be a safe citizen.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about that because I know that your intent is to roll that brand out here in the U.S. SafeCitizen.co.za is the website if you want to check it out. But we're going to get there in a moment. I want to ask you, for those that are maybe not familiar with the South African gun laws, if I'm a South African citizen coming of age and I want to buy, possess, and carry a firearm in South Africa, can you walk us through some of the steps I'm going to have to do that lawfully?
Yeah. First of all, you have to be 21 years of age. There is an exception where if you can prove an interest in dedicated sports shooting and you become registered as a dedicated sports shooter, you can hold a firearm for that sports shooting, a license to possess under 21, but it's quite rare. No exposure to or habit of intoxicating or habit-forming drugs, no criminal record involving domestic violence or violence, no criminal record involving fines, offences where imprisonment without the option of a fine could be imposed. Generally, somebody with a squeaky clean record. They apply for training, or they can just choose a trainer, and they go through a basic curriculum which teaches them 8 or 9 modules ranging from firearm safety to malfunctions and maintenance, ammunition, safety, the 7 fundamentals of shooting. A fairly well-rounded course to take somebody who's never fired a firearm or handled a firearm before, and teach them everything from the back end to the front end of the gun and their fundamentals. And that finishes with what is actually a very simple practical test. They have to fire 10 rounds with a handgun onto an A3 size sheet of paper at about 6 yards. And once they've done that, they can receive a certificate of proficiency if they pass that and they pass their written exams. And with that, they then go and apply for a competency certificate, which is a competency to possess a firearm. So the police actually have to review your application. They chat to your spouse, to your neighbor, and to one other person. So they do some basic reference checking. And they will, if they're happy, they will then certify you as competent to possess a firearm. And with that certification, you can then go and choose a firearm, buy a specific serial number, and make application for it. And once the application has been passed over many months, you then wait some more time for a printed card the size of a credit card, and then you can go and fetch your firearm at the dealer. That process, with the exception of the training and the competency application, gets followed for each and every firearm. So if you've got 40 firearms, you're going to go through that dog and pony show 40 times. Plus, if you have a self-defense license, you have to apply to renew it every 5 years. And 5 years, every time they will review it and say, no, we're not happy, this has happened in your background, or they will renew it. And if you have a sport shooting license or a firearm for hunting, it's a 10-year license. But so there's a regular review. There are really great restrictions. With a self-defense license, you're not allowed to own more than 200 rounds of ammunition. One of my students, despite my warnings to them in the training, was about a year ago, was caught on the road in a roadblock with about 220 rounds of ammunition. He spent the weekend in jail. They took his gun away, and every time you do anything with a firearm, they confiscate it for so-called ballistic testing. It disappears into a swamp of somewhere bad systems and can disappear for 2 years, that you can sit without your gun. So it is already a very draconian environment that we gun owners in South Africa live in.
Yeah, I mean, I hope everyone heard that. For every gun you own, you have to follow that lengthy Byzantine structure. That is just crazy, because one of the things that is a reality in South Africa, maybe specifically to someone that lives on a 10,000 acre farm, is farm attacks. and I know that here in America, we talked about this yesterday too, Jonathan. Some people say it's not true. It's a conservative fantasy. This is just not happening. And then there's the other side that says this is real. This is a threat we live under. Can you talk to us a little bit about farm attacks in South Africa?
Rex, yeah, it certainly is something that happens fairly regularly. In fact, there was one last night, about 80 kilometers, or let's call it for the American audience, about 60 miles away from where I live. This one, quite incidentally, nobody was injured or tortured or burnt or had boiling water poured on them, but they did manage to steal all of the firearms that were there. And generally on the farm attacks, they're either, so the farmers here, it's very much like a rural community in the United States, where farms can be anywhere from 5, 10, 15, 20 miles apart or more. And they're exposed to attack. And nobody can help them. There's no, even in America, you can't get a reaction very quickly on rural properties like that. In South Africa, where the police are completely under-resourced and mostly disinterested, in any case, you're on your own and you have to look after yourself. So the prevalence of these attacks definitely raised its frequency in the last 2 or 3 years. They have always been brutal. And when I talk about brutal, it's the type of brutality that you would expect from a psychopath under normal circumstances, under traditional, a traditional attack from that type of person. But I think that the people that are doing it are motivated by just a hatred of the person that they're attacking. And so even after they've got what they want, or established what assets are there that they can take with them, whether it's cars and laptops and electronics, and even firearms, they will sometimes occupy the homestead for some time and perpetrate all manner of crimes. If there are female victims, you can imagine what would happen there and the brutality that can come into it. Some of the methods that are used are drilling holes in people with power drills, boiling water and hot flat irons, often or frequently used. It almost seems to be something that's put out in an MO for the attackers to follow, because it seems to happen quite often. And it's really a lot of unnecessary brutality that traumatizes people. But what's been really an enormous issue for South Africans is that the government has chosen to ignore it and downplay it. And I think it was the year before last, our president is on record, on video somewhere, interviewed at some international gathering. It might even have been Davos, at the annual financial gathering in Switzerland, when he was asked by a journalist about farm attacks, and he played it down completely. He said, "No, he said, not really. There's no such. Not really a phenomena in South Africa. It doesn't really happen there. You know, people are misinforming you." We were shocked to hear that.
And you and I talked yesterday. There's several documentaries out right now about the farm murders and that you can find on YouTube. If you're watching this morning or listening to us and you're like, I'm not familiar with that, you can search those out and easily find them. They're done from journalists outside of South Africa. So they're coming in and looking at it with a fresh lens, if you will. And one of the things that I was shocked to see is that there is maybe a member of your parliament that when he goes to rally his troops, I mean, he's shouting, "Kill the Boer," and really racializing the attacks. Or it seems to me as an outsider, is there any racial aspect to the farm attacks that you've seen?
I think that they are motivated by economic circumstances, or maybe an economic motivation in terms of stealing what's possible. And certainly the majority of the attacks, unfortunately, appear to be perpetrated from one racial group to another, and with specific victims being targeted. The majority of farmers in South Africa are still Anglo-Saxon descent, so it's pretty easy to work that out. Having said that, I also don't think that that's the big problem here. I think the problem is that the government is adept at stoking racial divisions. They will never, ever allow the specter of apartheid to die. Every time something goes wrong, they blame it on the previous government, which was now no longer a government since 1994, so 94, 95, 2015. We're almost 3 decades into a new political dispensation, and yet the old government is still being blamed every time something goes wrong. If our power utility is in trouble, or our banking sector, or our airline, or any other public utility, it's the fault of the last regime, the last government. And they're adept at stoking that political division. And they're very clever, because they keep the South African community divided along racial lines. They know instinctively that if the community here could stand up as one against them, we would have them out at the next general election in a democratic process. I would never participate in any type of coup or something illegal, but certainly in a democratically driven process, we'd have them out in the next election. But they're very clever.
Yeah, and I see that racial division, of course, playing out here in America. And my 23 years in uniform as a Marine, yeah, there's no color there. There's no color in a foxhole. Yeah. You know, it's a brotherhood. And then now, as a private citizen, I see our same political leaders, to your point, Jonathan, that
Yeah,
seem to be stoking racial division.
yeah,
And I cannot for the life of me, like,
yeah,
why are you doing this?
yeah,
How
yeah,
does this help our country?
yeah. I can't. It slays me to actually see that happening in America, because America, for me, apart from being the land of the free and the home of the brave, is also the land of opportunity. And Americans are so blessed to live in that country, where they can choose to live a life of their own making, and where a lot of South Africans don't have that choice. And I just look at certain groups that are working very hard to destabilize American cities, and I think Antifa is one of them. And it absolutely amazes me how they can get away with it. And you hear these calls to defund the police force and to defund the police department. It's politics interfering where politics shouldn't be interfering, and the politicians lose sight of the fact that they're democratically elected. They are there to serve people, and they're doing everything but that.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. And as we pointed out, moments ago, you guys have the lessons of Zimbabwe to show you where this leads, stoking racial division, seizing land that doesn't, and claiming it for your own, giving it out to your political cronies. It drives the dollars away from your country, or the rands away from your country. It's divisive. Nobody wins. It leads to hyperinflation, economic collapse. And why, for the life of me, I just don't understand it, other than it's a short-term political gain for the person seeking votes, maybe.
Yeah, and also I think that in the last 25 years, the ANC has participated in so much corruption, and it's so endemic in the party that the leaders in our cabinet today, the cabinet ministers, it's alleged that many of them are involved in the corruption. They cannot afford for a new government to come in and expose them to the charges that might follow investigations. So they're very careful to try and maintain that status quo, and they like it the way that it is. I think an example that really brings it across is that when President Zuma was involved as the president of our country, the country decided to acquire locomotives from China. And they ordered these locomotives. I think it was at a cost of around about 45 million rand per locomotive. But what they traditionally do is they say to the supplier, okay, the locomotive is 45 million rand. We want an invoice from you for 55 million rand per locomotive. And the country will pay you 55 million rand per locomotive. Every one that you deliver, the extra 10 million rand that you've been paid will go into this offshore bank account. So they don't even have to do anything. And that's involved billions of rands of corruption. And that's the type of thing where the money is stolen out of the mouths of the people, out of the fiscus of the country. And the people that are most directly affected are the very voters that are keeping the ANC in power through their continued votes.
And I heard something like that after the ANC came to power at the end of apartheid in 1994, that part of the Truth and Reconciliation was some sort of affirmative action there in South Africa, and that that kind of seek to overturn some of the disenfranchisement that may have went on. And now it seems to have gone lopsidedly the other way. Whereas I think the South Africans of Anglo-Saxon descent, we'll call it that, who only comprise maybe 8-9% of your country, I could be wrong about that, are now finding it hard to get a job because of the affirmative action that has been put into place. Am I misunderstanding that?
No, you're not. it has gone to completely the opposite extreme. There is no place in any civil service, in any government department, for a person of Anglo-Saxon descent. My granddaughter was born in 2005. She's living in New Zealand today. She was born in 2005, 10 years after the end of the so-called apartheid era. She's living in New Zealand today, and I don't know when I will see her again. They went across about 6 months before COVID struck. But I don't know when I'll see her again. And her mother and my son-in-law took her to New Zealand so that she would have a future. We have a country of fractured families where the young people are leaving in droves because there is absolutely no future here for them, or no perceived future for them at all. An entire generation of qualified people is leaving the country. Qualified people. The other countries, New Zealand and Australia, are taking them with open arms because they want qualified people. The South Africans are known as having a good work ethic, and they're productive people. So, no, you're not overstating that. There is just, that's it. You're being punished now for things that happened decades ago.
Yeah, and I raised that point this morning. I get it. We're a self-defense podcast, but I raised that because I see, once again, I say South Africa's the canary in the coal mine. We got to watch what's going on there because we see the same rhetoric here in America, where this culture of victimhood, this idea that if I'm a disabled, gay, Muslim woman, I am I'm the top tier of the victim hierarchy or whatever. And now we have to disenfranchise everybody because of my strange status. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Again, we're going back to that divisive nature of government, right?
Yeah. I was quite shocked. In 2013, I was in San Francisco, and I was invited to the United States to accept an environmental award at a fairly high level. And I had just done a presentation or a speech to 3,000 people in the San Francisco Opera House. And after that, we had a sort of red carpet affair where the people that were there could come and greet myself and some of the other people that had made their presentations that evening. It was a sort of a reception. And an African-American gentleman came up to me, and he had some connection with South Africa, and I was completely caught unawares because everybody was busy congratulating and shaking hands and clapping me on the back and so on. And he walked up to me and he stuck his face right in my face and said, you're a stinking colonizer. It took my breath away, and my hosts, who were a very influential American family in San Francisco, were terribly embarrassed by this. But it shook me, and it illustrated to me that even in America, there are people that are very, very dissatisfied with the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think growing up as a Southerner, like I did, we have the legacy of slavery, and we, of course, were defeated by the North. So we have a little bit different culture than the rest of the United States because we had an invading army come through and burn our cities in the South to rid us of slavery. So it's a little bit different thing. I'm very keen on it when I see these kind of things coming to divide the people the way that they have done here. And it just really concerns me. And I'm so glad that people like you are speaking out. And now I want to turn our attention to Safe Citizen and your brand there in South Africa and what your intention is with rolling it out to the US.
The strapline of Safe Citizen is quite simple, and it holds that a lawfully armed citizen is a safe citizen. And we're a civil rights organization, essentially, so you don't have to be a gun owner to belong to Safe Citizen. You merely have to embrace the notion that private citizens should be free to choose to own a firearm, and free in South Africa choose to apply to own a firearm. And that the concept of private firearm ownership is not something that is destructive and divisive in the community, but that actually a lawfully armed citizen is also an asset to your community. They're an asset to the police. In a community where there are lawfully armed citizens, whether it's a school community or a church community or business community, the criminals generally stay away from there because they don't want to go where there are armed people. They want to pick on places where there are gun-free zones, where guns are not allowed. That's where they know there's easy pickings. So what I found interesting when I toured the United States in 2013 on a completely different ticket, on an environmental ticket, was I found that because you're from a different country, people are inclined to listen to you. And it makes getting an idea across that much easier. And particularly in this situation with something like Safe Citizen, if I am speaking from experience under what we have lived in South Africa and what we live in, I can speak with an authentic voice and say, guys, let's unite, let's get together, reach out to the person next to you and make some solidarity based on a really good precept of being lawfully armed.
I love that. I love that. And I like the way you phrase that, Johnathan, and I like the way you view that more specifically. And that is, this is a civil rights issue, and I think we need to look at that here in America that way. Like many people have said, it certainly isn't me, that the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, protects the First Amendment, the right to say whatever you want, right? And then it also protects against the Third Amendment, which most Americans don't know what the Third Amendment is. And the Third Amendment keeps federal troops from being just randomly posted inside your house without your approval. And we, of course, and it goes back to here in our country, we just got done fighting a war against England for our independence, where England would house its troops and just walk into your house and say, I'm taking it over. Yeah. So by giving us the ability to have firearms and the right to say what we want, you're not going to be able to just house your troops here. And most people don't know about the Third Amendment, but I want to, so I love the fact that let's keep it focused as a civil rights issue, which it truly is, I believe. But let's talk about real quick. So we have a phenomenon going on in America. Yesterday we had I believe 9 people killed, a mass killing here in America. And you mentioned gun-free zones a moment ago, Johnathan. And I'm going to ask you, sir, what do you see as a good remedy for the mass shootings? And if it's not gun control, or maybe you would feel it is, I don't know, I'm interested in hearing about it. What is the answer?
I don't think that that guns can be blamed for something like that. I looked at that shooting in California, and I was quite interested in it because despite all of California's restrictive gun laws and new regulations, it hasn't helped them at all to stop that. And so there's no real answer to it. I actually live with a great trepidation that somebody would take a firearm in South Africa and do something similar, because this government would probably embrace that immediately as a very good reason to bring in draconian measures, much as we saw about 2 years ago in New Zealand with that big mass killing, and the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern within a week after that banned semi-automatic rifles, just outright. That's it. So I don't see that there's a way around that. There's no way to predict it. It's quite interesting. Often that in America, I watch that when something like that happens, it comes out on the media later that the FBI had actually been following this person. They had been on a watch list, but they slipped through the cracks, or they were evaluated and they weren't deemed to be that much of a threat. So the one thing that I would say, and this might fly in the face of some advocates of not any type of gun control in the United States, is that if a person that is on a watch list for violent or terrorist tendencies or inclinations is involved in stockpiling firearms or buying firearms, they should be taken to task immediately. They should be banned from owning a firearm. They need to do, the law enforcement authorities need to do whatever they need to do. And they really have an obligation to do that for the community. But, you know, as sane as I appear to be and as law-abiding as I am at the age of 63, nobody could predict whether I would take one of my rifles tomorrow morning and go to a shopping mall and just let loose on 100 people. There's no way to predict it. And so gun laws, restrictive gun laws, are not going to assist that. They're never going to stop it. And evil people who have an evil inclination will always do something evil. So when they can't get hold of firearms, they'll do what we saw in Nice, in France, I think in 1990, 2018, 16, somewhere around there, where somebody took a large truck, 22-wheeler truck, and drove it through a crowd of holidaymakers on New Year's Eve. They killed 96 people outright and put another 350 into hospital. So, you know, evil people will perpetrate evil deeds irrespective of what weapon they have at hand. Firearm might make it a bit more convenient, but it will not regulate the evilness out of mankind.
100% agreed. And we have, you know, here in America, that some of the laws that you're referencing, we call them red flag laws, as the catch-all term for someone that is on the watch list or whatever. And most of us gun owners here have some problems with that. And I'll give you one little vignette to share with you. There's a friend of mine who's a firearms instructor here in the States, and he's one of his stepchildren had an issue, went back to the other parent, told a bunch of lies. The dad goes to the courts and said, I need an order of protection based on what my son is telling me. And the next thing you know, part of that order of protection, the judge can check a box that says remove all the firearms from the home. And it's like, it's based on the testimony of this kid who's upset because they made him do house chores. And with that close of a stroke of a pen, the judge could have taken this man's livelihood away from him. So, and like Tony points out, you know, with the Fourth Amendment here in America, with the right to due process, I think there's a tendency of overreach, or it just depends on that judge.
Yeah.
If that judge already doesn't like firearms, he's going to check the box. And we're done. So we're very worried about the abuse of the red flag laws.
Yeah.
Because like you said, there's no way to know who is going to be that person on that day. And while you probably maybe heard of this here in America, some have said that we have a mental health crisis masquerading as a gun problem, you know, and it may be or it may not be. But given your incredible background, Johnathan, what can the average person, whether it's a South African, a New Zealander, an American, do to make themselves harder to kill? What do you think?
I think that they certainly, key for me, the first thing is situational awareness. So, and I'm not a fighter. I wouldn't last 5 seconds with Mike Seekland. He'd knock me right off my feet. But I stay out of trouble like that by keeping my eyes open. I project an attitude of awareness. I'm aware of the key indicators in the behavior of other people that something is not quite right. And I've often had people saying to me that have been in public with me, whether we're driving or whether we're moving around, they say, I notice that the aggressive or the assertive beggars are bothering everybody else in the shopping center, but they're staying away from you. Why is that? And I say, well, because when I get out of my vehicle or I'm moving or walking around, you just project an attitude that says, I'm aware of you. I know what's probably on your mind, and I'm not a soft target. So go somewhere else. And that's kept me out of trouble in lots of countries around the world in some pretty dodgy areas. So that's the first thing, is situational awareness. Secondly, the ability to react quickly if you're going to have the proficiency to use some type of weapon, like a knife or some other self-defense solution. A very good option, be able to use it properly and have the will and the determination to use it. I think one needs to have worked through all of the things that are going to happen to you in an attack, where you've got to deal with your own value-based judgments as well. You don't want to be thinking at the time that something is happening, do I want to do this? Can I do it? Can I live with the consequences? Can I do it legally? Because by that time it's too late. So those choices have got to be processed well ahead of the time. You've got to understand what your reaction will be. You almost have to give yourself permission to do deadly harm to another person under a certain set of circumstances morally. And the other thing that gives great confidence in that, whether you're using something like a knife or some other hand-to-hand weapon or a firearm, is the confidence of knowing that you can employ it in certain circumstances and employ it effectively without putting any innocent person's life at risk. And key for me, that goes around all of that in a circle, is the provision. And that I say to my students, if you have got the smallest chance to run, turn, run as fast as you can, get out of there. If you're facing an altercation on the road in the traffic, ignore the person. You've never seen them in your life before. You'll probably never see them again. It's not worth it. Run. If you can, in your house, if you can slam a sliding door behind you or a security gate and get away from there, do it. You don't want to be in a police station unnecessarily. You don't want to have your firearms confiscated. You don't want to be charged with murder. And if you can avoid it, do it. I teach my students, and I would like to, if I had to be in a defensive shooting situation in civilian circumstances, I would like to be able to stand in front of a judge and say, if I didn't pull the trigger at that moment, I was convinced that I was going to die. And then I pulled the trigger.
Yeah, that's well said. Well said. Yako says a couple different things. He says, Jonathan said situational awareness, but here is the problem. Most guys just want to do the cool tactical stuff. And then he says, I've probed with regards to this to other instructors to present, I guess, situational awareness, but the lack of interest is astounding. Yeah. I see that here in America too. Yeah,
you do. And there's a lot of gung-ho stuff. And when there's a self-defense shooting here or an attack, and you see it in America, and I spend a lot of time on the internet in the US as well, watching the shooting fraternity. And then you'll get all of these guys weighing in, I would have done this and I would have done that. And none of them were standing in that guy's shoes at the time that it happened. None of them understood physiologically what was happening to him in the moment of that attack. So it's very easy behind a computer keyboard to act like Chuck Norris, but it's a different thing in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, I understand you're a speaker and an author. Tell us about that side of your work.
It's quite surprising because when I was in my second year of high school, the headmaster of my school said to me, Deal, he said, you will never amount to anything. And he was probably right at that time to make that type of statement, because I had failed 2 years. We call it Standard 6 and Standard 7, and I joke with people. I said I enjoyed Standard 6 and Standard 7 so much I did them both twice. So by the time my friends were finishing their fourth year, I was still finishing my second year. But I was a bit of a late bloomer because I had a penchant for writing. And I enjoy writing, and ended up publishing this book which is it's a coffee table book, but with some 80,000 words, and developed an interest in photography. So that was quite interesting, and it's a good conversation starter because people around the world have a sort of automatic respect for somebody that's published a book, especially if it wasn't sort of a self-published vanity thing, but actually picked up by a commercial publisher and been a success. And yeah, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that very much. It's on a region called the Karoo, which is where I live. It's an enormous semi-desert region in South Africa with a very, very interesting history and culture, ecologically and from a cultural point of view, and a very unique area in this country. And the book is called Timeless Karoo, and I think that I've got to find a way to get a copy across for you and my shooting idol or mentor, Mike Seeklander. I'm sure he'd enjoy receiving a copy.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to get together on that, Jonathan. So it's been an amazing show. I've kept you on here for almost an hour and a half. I want to be respectful. I know you got stuff to do in your day, Jonathan. Where can people find you?
There are two easy places. One is on SafeCitizen, so it's quite straightforward, safecitizen.co.za. And the other one is on zeropointsdownacademy.com. ZPD, but that's the abbreviation, but it's the full name of the website is zeropointsdownacademy.com. And of course, you would have picked up that 0 points down comes from the IDPA way of scoring.
Yeah, and I've got links to everywhere that Jonathan just mentioned in the links in today's show notes. Please follow him there and follow the fight that's going on in South Africa over the rights of a citizen to be armed in their community and not have those rights infringed upon. I think that the solidarity in our community, this gun fraternity, if you want to call it that, has to be strong because it's not just a South African fight. It's not just an American fight. It's a fight across the nation for free men. If we don't stand together with this, it's going to be a problem because look at New Zealand, like you said, one mass shooting, one president decides to outlaw semi-automatic handguns, but I'm happy to reply that most New Zealanders did not turn those firearms in. It was an absolute failure, their mandatory gun confiscation, and they quietly folded up the tent on that. However, let's not forget that those people that retain those semi-automatic firearms are forever criminals in the eyes of the law. So it's something we got to be aware of. Jonathan, any parting thoughts, sir?
Just to thank you really for this opportunity. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the line of questioning and all the places we've gone. And I'd love the opportunity to maybe work at rolling out Safe Citizen in the United States. I'd be very happy to receive some approaches and maybe even some invitations to come and discuss with interested communities the difference that it could make where they live. And maybe it's the right thing at the right place, right time.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of things that I think that folks that are fighting the fight here in America can learn from what you guys are doing. And I would love to see you work with people like Samuel Parades, who is fighting the fight out there in California and doing some great things. I think that you guys have a lot in common. Jonathan, thanks again for coming on. Thank you for everybody watching us live. Thanks to everybody that listened to that are going to be listening to us in the days and weeks and years to come. Remember, folks, it's not just South Africa. It's not just America. The fight is coming. Let's be ready.
Thank you, Rich.